Welcome to Sleepless Philosophers. Tonight begins a long wandering through paradoxes, those strange knots of thought that refuse to untangle. They are the puzzles that stretch the mind in quiet ways, forcing it to hold two truths at once, both impossible and undeniable. They whisper an ancient question into the ear. What happens when the mind tries to chase certainty, only to find itself caught in a loop? If this exploration feels meaningful, please remember to press like and subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because each night a new story is lit here like a candle. And share softly in the comments where the night has found you. What hour it is where you listen. What kind of silence surrounds you now? The first paradox tonight is one of identity, the ship of Theseus. Imagine a great wooden ship sailing across the Greek seas, proud and weathered. With time, the wood begins to rot. Plank by plank, the sailors replace it, until no original piece remains. Is it still the same ship? At first, it feels like a trick of language, yet the longer the thought lingers, the stranger it becomes. If all the old planks are stored and later reassembled into another vessel, which one is truly the ship of Theseus, the one of new parts, or the one built from the old? Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. Thomas Hobbes sharpened the puzzle further, adding the twist of two ships, one of continuity and one of origin. Which carries the real identity? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. The paradox travels beyond ships. The human body is a ship of planks. Every cell is replaced over time, old parts discarded, new ones born. A person today shares almost none of the same physical matter they once carried as a child. Yet the sense of being the same endures. Why? Is it the continuity of memory, or a story the mind tells itself to maintain coherence? The paradox stirs unease because if identity is not rooted in unchanging material, what anchors it? Modern neuroscience complicates it further. Memories themselves are not fixed. Each time one is recalled, it is rewritten, reshaped, as fragile as wax under heat. In this way, even memory shifts like planks, altered slowly by repetition and perspective. Perhaps the self is not a solid structure, but a river, always flowing, never the same water twice, yet still named as one river. Heraclitus hinted at this long before science confirmed it. No man steps into the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man. But the paradox resists peace. If continuity alone makes identity, then a perfect copy of a person, with the same memories and habits, would count as the same self. Yet instinct rebels. A clone is not the original. Something invisible must bind the real identity. Nietzsche might smile at this discomfort. He often wrote of masks, the way people change faces yet insist they remain the same. He asked whether identity itself is nothing more than a mask worn long enough that the wearer forgets it was ever chosen. Modern psychology leans on narrative. The self is not a thing but a story, told again and again in slightly different words, enough to feel continuous. The brain weaves fragments into coherence. Without the story, there is only chaos. Viktor Frankl once said that meaning is found in the way one interprets suffering, not in suffering itself. Perhaps the same is true of identity. It exists not in planks or cells, but in the way we interpret the fragments of our lives into a single tale. The paradox of Theseus's ship echoes in strange corners. In technology, as artificial intelligence advances, a question emerges. If an AI learns a person so fully it can imitate their speech, their choices, even their flaws, has identity been transferred? If that replica continues to grow, to learn, to change, does it hold the same essence as the one who once lived? In medicine, a patient receiving organ transplants, mechanical limbs, even neural implants, raises the same quiet doubt. How much can be replaced before the person is no longer the same? The paradox lingers in art. A painting restored so many times that none of the original paint remains. Does it still hold the hand of the artist, or only the illusion of it? In language, words that drift in meaning over centuries are still called by their old names, though what they mean now is something else entirely. The ship of Theseus is not a puzzle to be solved, but a mirror. It reflects the human need to hold on to identity in a world of constant change. Every heartbeat carries impermanence, yet the mind insists on continuity. The paradox teaches softly, in candlelight. Identity may not be a thing at all, but a process, like the flame itself. A flame is never the same in two moments, yet it is always, called one fire. Perhaps the self is like this, an unbroken illusion of constancy, a dance of change pretending to be permanence. Tonight the question lingers in the quiet. What makes something itself? Is it the material, the memory, the story? Or is it simply the name carried forward, believed long enough that belief itself becomes reality? The paradox does not answer. It only leaves the mind circling itself, like waves around an old ship, asking which plank, which moment, which thought makes the vessel truly real. And maybe the deeper truth is that the question itself has no shore. It only rocks gently, like a ship on dark water, carrying the sleeper into silence. Night deepens around the desk, where a small flame studies a pool of wax, and the mind follows the next knot of thought, a quieter paradox that governs belief. Truth should win by evidence, yet belief often bends to repetition, a soft drum that trains the ear until familiar sound feels like fact. Psychologists gave this drift a name, the illusory truth effect, and its logic unsettles anyone who trusts the mirror of memory. In 1977, Lynn Hasher, David Goldstein, and Thomas Topino asked participants to rate statements as true or false. Some sentences reappeared across sessions. Repetition alone pulled ratings upward. Familiarity did the lifting. Accuracy stood outside in the cold. Robert Zayonk mapped the same pathway earlier, calling it mere exposure, the odd comfort that grows when a face, a tone, a melody returns again and again. No argument is needed. Fluency in processing, that smooth glide inside the head, masquerades as certainty. A brain prefers easy traffic to heavy reasoning, so a well-worn sentence feels right, even when it is wrong. This is the paradox. Truth becomes a function of echo. Sound makes substance. A headline repeated across rooms starts to glow with a false halo, and later memory preserves the halo more stubbornly than the data. The effect grows stronger when attention drifts, when fatigue weighs the eyelids, when the room is quiet and the candle is kind. It feels safe to believe what comes back often. Safety can be a liar. The history of propaganda is a museum of rehearsed confidence. Slogans used like lullabies shape nations because rhythm clears away resistance. Even debunking can amplify the tune because repetition, without careful context, still primes the grooves. Cognitive scientists warn about this backfire, noting how corrections must replace the myth rather than echo it. A short phrase can water a forest of false memory if it keeps returning with an easy beat. The paradox goes deeper. Memory does not play back the past like a fixed tape. Each recall rewrites. Reconsolidation changes details by degrees. A listener remembers the feeling of the sentence more than the skeleton of the facts. Vividness wins. Simplicity wins. Repetition wins. Evidence stands patiently at the door and waits to be invited. The candle does not move. The air remains still. Yet inside, belief shifts with the rhythm of what returns. Philosophers sensed this current long before psychology measured it. Nietzsche wrote of the herd instinct in knowledge, the way ideas circulate until strength confuses itself with truth. Kierkegaard feared the crowd for similar reasons. Numbers give noise authority. Modern behavioral research adds a sober addendum. Daniel Kahneman described the lazy brilliance of System 1, fast, associative, sometimes beautifully right, often confidently wrong, and the labour of System 2, slow, deliberate, capable of turning down the volume on easy fluency when it has the time and energy. Most days the mind runs on speed. Speed treats familiarity as proof. Here the paradox sharpens. A population that demands clarity also craves effortlessness, and the craving quietly corrupts the clarity. The mind wants a path that glides. The path that glides creates wrong convictions that feel soft and warm, like a blanket that someone forgot to wash. Strange examples collect in daily life. A child hears an urban legend each semester and carries it into adulthood as a private heirloom. A team repeats a broken process until the brokenness sounds normal, then defends it as culture. A marketplace learns a slogan and begins to feel the product as strong or clean or free, though the liquid in the bottle never changed. A court of public opinion lifts a falsehood because the phrase "learn to sing." Humour suffers the same gravity. A joke repeated enough times draws laughs, even when it lost bite years ago. Laughter remembers its own path and follows it, quietly ironic, almost sad. There is a darker corner where the paradox turns predatory. Con artists feed the loop on purpose. A message lands in many small touches, never too heavy, always just familiar enough. Victims later feel the trace as trust. Once trust exists, the next request walks in like a friend. The Ben Franklin effect can then slide into place, as small favours create internal stories about liking and loyalty. Step by soft step, the loop becomes a chain. The candle flickers and steadies. Somewhere a clock whispers the same second for the 60th time, and repetition again feels like truth. Another layer waits in language itself. The liar paradox, old as Epimenides, plays a game with self-reference. This sentence is false. If the sentence is true, then it is false. If it is false, then it is true. The mind respects logic, then watches logic fold in on itself. Gödel later used self-reference to show that complete systems hold statements that cannot be proven within the system. Even arithmetic carries unresolvable whispers. At the edge of certainty sits a mirror that reflects doubt back forever. When certainty feels too smooth, perhaps fluency is wearing a mask again. The paradox of familiarity and truth asks an uncomfortable question. If repetition can author belief, then who is writing the mind's library, and which shelves are stocked by accident? Consider a small habit with gentler stakes. A sleeper plays the same rain track nightly until the body mistakes the sound for sleep itself. Later, silence makes rest harder. The sound became a gate, comfort turned into dependency. The same pattern animates habits of thought. Repeat a lens often enough, and the world shows only what the lens allows. Minimalists advise subtraction for this reason. Remove a possession, then another, and watch attention regain sharpness, because the repeated noise finally stops. Teachers rediscover this with a chalkboard. Erasing cluttered notes, they write a single careful line. Students feel an uncommon lift, and the truth in the sentence grows clearer, not by argument, but by quiet. Familiarity can steal truth, yet familiarity can also reveal it if what repeats is clean. That is the strangest twist. The paradox does not say repetition is evil. It warns that repetition is powerful. Power must be guided. Viktor Frankl found meaning by rehearsing courage in terrible conditions, repeating a private vow until the vow felt real enough to stand in the cold. Athletes rehearse motion until the body ferries the mind across pressure without thinking. Monks repeat prayers until attention stops fighting and begins to open. Repetition can degrade belief, and repetition can dignify it. The candle lowers, the wax builds a small lake around a blackened wick. The mind rests beside the paradox like a traveller at a well. Familiarity comforts, familiarity deceives, familiarity teaches, familiarity blinds. A listener can choose which loop to feed by choosing what to hear often. Even that choice contains another paradox, because the selection itself will become familiar and therefore feel true. So the practice becomes humble. Keep evidence near. Keep curiosity awake. Keep a space where silence can interrupt the favorite chorus. Then let repetition carry only what deserves to survive the echo. The small flame leans and returns, as if listening, and the mind turns to a quieter snare. The paradox of control. The way grasping tight makes the thing slip. The way forcing rest keeps eyes open. The way suppressing a thought brings it back brighter than before. In quiet laboratories, Daniel Wegner watched students ring a bell whenever a white bear crossed the mind, and the room became a winter of bells, because banning a bear is an invitation for snow. He called it ironic process theory. An intentional guard tries to keep the gate, while a background scout loops endlessly through memory looking for the forbidden shape. The scout meant to help delivers the very image that breaks the rule. The mind obeys and defies itself at once. Here hides a soft terror. The harder sleep is chased, the sharper it runs. The more serenity is commanded, the more tension colonizes the chest. Worry about heartbeat increases heartbeat. A ban on sadness grows a garden of grey. Suppression carves paths through attention, and those paths become the easiest roads to walk. Stoic practice answers with a small lamp. Epictetus taught a division between what is up to a person and what is not. He spoke of hands ready for work and a heart ready for loss. He did not propose apathy, he proposed gentle power. Control is redefined as the posture toward what cannot be held. The paradox softens when aim becomes acceptance, action, and release, rather than domination. Lao Tzu mirrored this with water. Water yields and does not break. It moves around the stone, and with patient touch the stone thins. Wu Wei, effortless action, is not laziness, it is alignment. The fisherman who pulls too hard tears the net. The musician who strains at mastery stiffens the fingers and kills the tone. Miyamoto Musashi warned against a narrow gaze. Fixation deforms skill. The swordsman must let attention widen like evening light, so movement can choose the simplest path. Modern therapy folds these old lanterns into method. Acceptance and commitment practices teach a person to notice thoughts as passing sounds, not commands. The instruction is plain. When the bear arrives, greet it, then return attention to what matters. When anxiety arrives, let it sit in a chair by the window, then resume the small task. The paradox begins to work in reverse. Letting the thought exist robs it of the heat acquired through banishment. The bell grows quiet because no one is listening for it with fear. The control paradox also rules ambition. The more happiness is pursued as a target, the more it feels like a receding shoreline. Brickman and Campbell labelled the treadmill of adaptation, a drifting baseline that swallows big wins with alarming speed. Andrew Clark and Betsy Stevenson mapped a similar curve across nations, where more wealth brings comfort, then dullness, then new hunger for a still distant level. The pursuit of happiness often subtracts the conditions that produce it, because happiness usually visits during absorption in something else. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi described flow as deep involvement, where time thins and the self quiets. And paradoxically, this absence of self brings the richest sense of life later. No one enters flow by commanding flow. Entry arrives naturally when the attention holds a meaningful challenge at the right edge of skill, and when control of outcome has been traded for full presence in process. The candle lowers, and wax gathers in a patient ring. A story from the sea returns like tide. Odysseus, knowing the sirens, bound himself to the mast and ordered the crew to fill their ears with wax. He lost control in order to keep it. Thomas Schelling studied this logic in Modern Decisions, calling it self-command. Paradoxically, freedom sometimes emerges from prior restraint. A person who locks a phone in a drawer gains more movement in a day than someone who leaves every notification open. A writer who vows to produce one humble page daily becomes more prolific than a writer pursuing inspiration. A drinker who refuses the first glass exercises less willpower than a drinker promising to negotiate with the second. Bind the mast, then sail. Let limitation become a doorway. Control through pre-commitment is not brute force. It is tenderness with a known weakness. Another knot waits at the centre of guilt and shame. The more guilt is fought, the more it grows, since fighting confirms its weight. Yet unattended shame leaks into decisions like ink. The paradox resolves, not through denial, but through naming, then aligning with small forward action. Frankl watched prisoners at Auschwitz orient attention toward fragments of meaning, a future project, a memory of love, a line of text, and noticed that when meaning was chosen under utter constraint, the soul grew. Unexplainable space. Control of circumstance was gone. Control of attitude remained, fragile yet real. The paradox here is plain. Surrender creates grip. Grip creates loss. In the marketplace, another version speaks softly. A negotiator who cannot bear to walk away pays a tax for panic. A leader obsessed with micromanagement abolishes initiative and then must control still more because no one else dares to move. A parent strangling a teenager's schedule breeds secrecy, then wonders why distance rises like steam on glass. Systems respond to pressure by growing pressure. The paradox is mechanical. Over-control damages feedback, and damaged feedback forces more over-control. The remedy is steadier than it sounds. Define the goal precisely. Define the non-negotiables carefully. Then broaden local freedom. The system learns to self-regulate, which is the only durable regulation. On a smaller stage, attention obeys similar laws. Focus clenched, too tight begins to tremble. Musicians call it the yips. Archers call it target panic. The cure repeats the same hush. Widen the gaze. Restore peripheral vision. Let breath lengthen. The shot releases itself. In laboratories studying performance under stress, a two-step instruction outperforms complex talk. Label the feeling. Redirect to a simple cue. Anxiety can remain present while skill proceeds. The flame nods once in a faint draft and steadies. A strange cousin of the control paradox lives in morality. The more a person polishes an image of goodness, the more darkness collects just beneath the cloth, because perfection becomes a role to defend rather than a practice to embody. Jung spoke of the shadow with careful respect. Only what is acknowledged can be transformed. Repression breeds projection. Denied anger appears as constant outrage at the faults of others. Denied desire appears as contempt for the joy of neighbours. The paradox, again, is solved by turning toward, not turning away. Seeing the unflattering part of the soul loosens its grip. A woman who admits pride can bend. A man who admits envy can celebrate. Control grows by relinquishing the fantasy of control. Even language reveals the knot. Anyone who has tried to remember a forgotten name by force knows the trick. Tension narrows attention and makes recall worse. The name arrives in the shower later when the mind is relaxed. Poets work with this law by ritual. Walks rather than clenched thought. Simple chores rather than grinding. Soft eyes rather than screens. Wisdom traditions converged here from opposite mountains. Stoics counsel inner discipline while accepting fate. Taoists counsel alignment with flow while acting cleanly. Buddhists counsel non-grasping while maintaining right effort. Each prefers a different melody, yet the chorus matches. Grip less, guide more, force less, shape more, command less, commit more. The candle nears the end of its small world and pools into a final clear lake, and the mind holding this paradox feels a quiet choice. Open. Replace control with craft. Replace clutching with clarity. Replace suppression with permission and redirection. A thought can walk past without being arrested. A feeling can sit without being fed. A habit can be shaped before it wakes by binding the environment to help. Control, the loud kind, will always betray. The quieter kind, made of preparation and acceptance, will usually keep its promises. What remains is practice, night after night, in gentle repetitions that leave no claw marks. Control as a light hand on a small tiller. Control as a clean routine that is hard to break. Control as a decision about what to allow, combined with a faith that water knows how to move. The mind, a river. The body, a vessel. The candle, an hour of tide. The bear passes through snow and does not turn its head, and the bell is finally bored of ringing. The flame sighs and keeps its small circle, and the mind moves toward a restless riddle of modern life, the paradox of measurement, the way chasing a number can ruin the very thing the number was meant to protect, the way a target designed to sharpen reality quietly bends it out of shape until the map replaces the ground and the ground stops being seen at all. Economists name the drift Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And social scientist Donald Campbell added a nearby warning that indicators used for social decision-making invite corruption of the processes they are meant to monitor. It sounds abstract until the room fills with examples. In colonial India, a bounty on dead cobras inspired breeding. Baskets of snakes raised gently in courtyards for harvest, tail by tail, until authorities cancelled the program and the breeders released their now worthless stock, scattering more cobras than before. In Hanoi, a bounty on rat tails produced tidy piles of tails, and a city that noticed, suspiciously, healthy rats fleeing with tail stubs, because incentive beats intention when attention narrows to account. Factories in command economies learn to ship nails by the ton when paid by weight, heavy and useless, then switch to tiny pins when paid by count, fragile and absurd, until the metric looked right and the objects were wrong. Schools measured by test scores suffer a kind of educational anemia, as art and curiosity are cut away to feed a single chart, and the narrow chart still lies, because drilling can game the format without nourishing thought. Banks that idolize cross-sell ratios find false accounts blooming like mold in the corners of paperwork, a scandal built from a scoreboard. Public safety, judged by tidy statistics, learns to avoid messy calls that might spoil the averages. Hospitals forced to hit targets on waiting times sometimes stack patients in ways that invite compliance on paper and damage in flesh. The paradox hurts because the measure began as a promise. People wanted to see clearly. Instead, they were taught to stare. The candle does not blink. The wax deepens its clear pool. The lesson creeps outward. Social media installs visible counters that were meant to signal resonance. Then those counters begin to train expression itself, and honest voice thins into performance. The metric replaces the music. Artists start to write for the graph. The graph rewards the echo. The echo grows a culture of sameness, and sameness is an efficient grave. The mind hears another whisper, McNamara's fallacy, the temptation to trust only what can be counted, as if the unmeasured does not exist, as if a war becomes progress because body counts rise and spreadsheets say so. W. Edwards. Deming offered a gentler sentence in reply that most things which matter cannot be measured, at least not easily, and that obsession with targets breeds distortions surely, as pressure makes steam. James C. Scott described the blindness of large schemes in Seeing Like a State, the way tidy visions clear away the messy knowledge of locales, then fail with elegant confidence. The paradox returns to daily life, where private goals behave like public quotas. A person who loves reading installs a daily page target and slowly stops loving books, eyes counting instead of wandering. A runner who began for the quiet joy of air ties progressed to steps and ends up circling a kitchen at midnight to satisfy a device. Heart obedient, soul absent, sleep delayed. A relationship starts to keep score and then loses kindness. A saver tracks net worth so tightly that generosity feels like a defect. The measure makes a mirror that flatters the watcher and forgets the world. Yet giving up on measurement is not the answer, because chaos eats meaning when there is no form. What to do with the paradox? One answer is to choose blended gauges that cannot be gamed by a single trick. Quality with quantity, long-term with short, inputs with outcomes, subjective texture with hard numbers placed side by side and read aloud in one breath. Another answer is to guard the purpose so fiercely that any metric must kneel to it, and if the metric begins to pull loyalty away, it is changed without ceremony. The way a captain shifts a compass that has found a magnet. A quieter answer, perhaps the oldest, is to aim for craft rather than scoreboard, to become the sort of person who cares for the work as a garden is cared for, measuring only to notice where water is needed and where weeds begin, careful but not enslaved. Herbert Simon warned that maximizing becomes a trap when the world is complex, that satisficing, a wise sufficiency managed with taste, often outruns the strained attempt at perfection because perfection collapses into theatre. Barry Schwartz showed the cost of too many choices, and here the paradox aligns, because too many metrics splinter attention until the system chases all and honours none. A better habit stacks 3 or 4 simple dials that speak together. Another better habit sets a ceiling on measurement time so the living outnumbers the counting. The candle leans and returns. The mind considers the eerie humour of perverse incentives. Colonial cobras and French rats feel distant, yet the shape repeats in every era. A child paid for A grades chooses the easiest classes and learns the oldest trick in management. That one can please the spreadsheet while starving the spirit. A police department punished for reported crimes discourages reports. A charity judged by overhead keeps wages so lean that talent flees and mission fails cleanly. A government that rewards clean streets pretends by painting over cracks. The paradox is weary and very old. In the background, a softer thought grows like ivy, that the human nervous system itself uses proxies, and so some distortion is built in. Fluency stands in for truth. Familiarity stands in for safety. What gets repeated stands in for what is real. The same architecture sits beneath Goodhart's warning. The mind cannot carry the whole, so it chooses a part and calls the part the world. The art of living becomes the art of proxy selection, held lightly, revised without pride. In science, this becomes humility about operational definitions. In ethics, this becomes suspicion of tidy slogans. In leadership, this becomes the discipline to sunset dashboards that no longer serve, and the courage to say aloud that a number rising nicely might indicate a harm. The paradox also hides a bright invitation. When a measure starts to corrode the thing itself, it reveals the living edges that cannot be captured, which are precisely the edges that deserve attention. A school returns to experiments, portfolios, and student narratives. A hospital blends throughput with stories from bedside. A company mixes revenue with customer letters that mention relief or delight. A family replaces the count of minutes at dinner with one true conversation. A maker of songs ignores the chart and keeps the hour where sound remains private until it is beautiful. Night absorbs the room. The tiny flame draws lower, and still the mind hears a rhythm in the dark. Measure to notice, not to worship. Change metrics as easily as one changes shoes after rain. Keep purpose in front where numbers cannot obscure it. Trust craft and context and long feedback loops. If a bounty invites breeding, end the bounty. If a target breeds theatre, change the stage. If counting begins to bruise the heart of the thing, close the ledger and listen. Then reopen it with a wiser hand. This is not an argument against clarity. It is an argument for living measures, tended like gardens, rotated like crops, checked for pests of vanity and mildew of fear, warmed in the sun of honest conversation and pruned of branches that shade out the fruit. The candle gives one last soft breath. The room holds a pause. The paradox of measurement does not disappear, but it becomes friendlier, like an animal that stops biting when it is fed the right food. and the work itself begins to speak again, quietly, in its own language, which is how meaning has always measured itself in the dark. The room holds its hush, and the candle lifts a small cone of warmth, and the mind steps into a quiet, civic riddle, the paradox of conformity, the way silence creates agreement that no one believes, the way a crowd can hide 100 private doubts behind a single public nod, the way the fear of standing out builds a prison without walls where everyone guards the door from the inside and still feels trapped. Philosophers warned about this long before laboratories lit their lamps. Kierkegaard distrusted the crowd because responsibility dissolves there, and what dissolves is conscience. Nietzsche called the herd a comfort that charges a hidden tax on clarity. Emerson praised self-reliance not as swagger, but as an antidote to polite slavery. Then psychologists entered with rulers and clipboards and made the eerie familiar in measurable ways. In Solomon, Ash's line experiments, strangers sat in a row, actors first, a naive participant last. The cards showed one line and then three, with one obvious match. The actors answered incorrectly, in chorus. The naive mind watched confidence become sound, then felt hands grow cold, then often joined the mistake, denying the eyes to belong to the room. Conformity rose and fell with small signals. One ally broke the spell. A single true voice cut error by a cliff, because the fear was not being wrong, the fear was being alone. Stanley Milgram's obedience studies added a darker shade to the same shape. A calm man in a lab coat told participants to press switches labelled with voltages. Actors screamed behind a wall. Many continued when they hated it, not because they were cruel, but because they were caught in a script where authority defined duty and duty drowned doubt. Elizabeth Noel Neumann later traced the spiral of silence, where perceived majorities grow from thin air because dissenters go quiet, and quiet makes the majority seem larger still, and the circle tightens until truth loses oxygen. Timur Kuran called it preference falsification, the strange economy of hearts where public statements diverge from private beliefs, and then the lie becomes infrastructure. The paradox sharpens. Everyone conforms because everyone else seems to conform. In truth, almost no one agrees, but agreement appears thick as fog. Daily life supplies, softer copies. A team sits around a glossy table. The plan on the screen feels brittle, yet heads tilt in dutiful rhythm as if wind blew through hair. Later, the same heads bend over coffee and admit misgivings. The system pretends consensus while preparing failure. A classroom stares at a projector. No one understands the step, and no one asks. Later, each thought the others understood, and shame kept the room silent. A neighbourhood watches a small injustice unfold. Eyes meet, then look away, each person assuming someone braver will act first. The paradox joins hands with the bystander effect here. Bibb Latané and John Darley watched smoke drift under a door in a controlled study. Alone, a person rose and reported. In a group, eyes met and hands froze, and smoke became a social puzzle that no one solved. Responsibility diluted, action seemed like a performance, caution wore the costume of care. Conformity thrives on three nutrients: uncertainty, isolation, and the hunger for belonging. The mind wants a map. The group offers a shortcut. Social proof whispers that the safest path is the popular one. Yet the safe path can be a cliff if no one is watching the edge. W.H. Auden once called poetry a way of happening, not a thing. Conformity is similar. It is a way events unfold when no person refuses the script. It is not one villain's choice, it is many small hesitations braided into a rope. The candle lowers a fraction. Wax remembers heat in a clear lake. The paradox looks less like drama and more like weather. What breaks it is often ridiculously small. In Ash's experiments, a single partner telling the truth cut error almost to nothing. In classrooms, one hand raised without shame gives permission to 20 more. In offices, A manager who voices uncertainty by example lowers the price of candor. Spiral undone. No great speeches, only tiny models of courage repeated. A quiet irony sits at the center. Speaking up feels dangerous because it risks the loss of belonging. Silence feels safe because it preserves access to the group. But silence endangers belonging in the long run because it allows foolish norms to harden into culture. And culture eventually punishes everyone who must live under it. The safest act is the brave one, done gently, early, and often. History shows both sides. Conformity becomes catastrophe when slogans harden into law and neighbours betray neighbours to prove loyalty to abstractions. Yet community becomes stronger when small dissent is treated as care, not as attack. John Stuart Mill argued that even wrong opinions should be aired, since they force truth to keep its muscles. The muscle atrophies in rooms where heads only nod. Social media magnifies the paradox by compressing reputation into fast signals, hearts and counts, and ratios that measure belonging without measuring truth. Elizabeth Noel Neumann would recognize the theatre. The perceived majority becomes a heat map, and dissenters learn to scan for weather before speaking. Some conform by shouting louder than their convictions. Some conform by slipping into ironic distance. Both are masks. The person who still tries to be earnest in a noisy square can feel foolish, yet the square needs that foolishness more than it knows. A softer branch of this paradox lives in design rooms and laboratories. The Hippo effect, where the highest paid person's opinion tilts the table, is a comedy with serious costs. Data is collected to justify the boss, not to confront the boss. Again, one ally breaks the spell. A junior who says, "This graph scares me," and a leader who replies, "Tell me more," and the culture shifts 1 degree toward daylight. The candle flickers once and steadies. The mind studies practical paths without grandiosity. The first path is pre-commitment to candor, not unlike Odysseus binding himself to the mast. A team can bind itself to a ritual where each person speaks a worry before plans are blessed. Another path is structured dissent, red teams that must find failure modes, rotating devil's advocates, so dissent does not mark one person permanently. Another is anonymity used wisely at first, private channels that surface concerns without penalty, then public conversation once trust grows. Another is the simplest of all, the humble request for one other to join. The Ash ally scaled for grown rooms. In personal life, the paradox appears as taste. A person discovers a book that moves the heart, then hides the love because friends prefer cooler things. Later the love fades and something irreplaceable is lost to a ritual of pretending. Emerson's warning returns here, that imitation is suicide. Not the dramatic kind, the slow kind, the kind that leaves a body walking and a mind dimmer by degrees. A listener might remember the earlier chapters, paradoxes of control, of repetition, of measurement, and notice how conformity recruits each cousin to strengthen its hold. Fear of standing out tightens control. Repeated signals turn opinions into facts. Metrics of applause replace meaning. The knots tie together into one rope. The remedy follows the same weave in reverse. Loosen grip, reset signals, replace cures of counting with cures of craft. Build a small circle where candor is praised in daily dull ways, not only in slogans. Reward the person who changes their mind without humiliation. Teach the room to distinguish disagreement about ideas from harm to people. The paradox then shrinks. It never dies. It no longer runs the house. Philosophers of inner life saw this long ago. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself as if briefing a soldier whose whole cohort might be wrong, reminding that nature gave a mind to examine without bitterness and a heart to keep goodwill while resisting. Lao Tzu whispered that the best leaders are those whose people say, "We did it ourselves." That sentence hides a resistance to vanity, and vanity is conformity's secret parent. What remains after study is small and human. A neighbour asks a troubling question aloud at the town meeting. A nurse documents an overlooked risk. A student says this part confused the whole class, and laughter breaks, and learning finally begins. The candle lowers again. Shadows lengthen. Agreement has a place, but only after a true argument. Belonging has a place, but only after honest presence. The paradox gently invites a vow, not to be loud, not to be clever, but to be willing to be the first voice in a room that needs one, and then to make room for the second and the third, until a crowd becomes a company of persons again. And the nod means something clean. The candle waits like a patient star, and the mind turns toward a quiet social riddle, a paradox of agreement that creates losses for all. The way a table of earnest faces nods toward a plan none of them truly wants. The way a bus rolls toward a distant town because no one wished to disappoint. A strange comedy that ends in dust and heat, and the feeling that everyone was courteous and everyone was foolish at the same time. Jerry B. Harvey told that story as the Abilene Paradox, a family that drives across Texas to eat a bland meal in a hot cafe, each person thinking the others desired the trip, none of them wanting it at all. It sounds like a joke until memory admits how often it happens. A company launches a product no one trusts. A committee chooses a candidate no one believes in. A circle of friends agrees to plans that will bore them all. The paradox is not simply conformity, though conformity leans heavily on its shoulder. It is preference falsification, as Timur Kuran described, when private beliefs remain guarded and public statements align with a phantom majority. And then the phantom steers the real world. Pluralistic ignorance adds more fog. At Princeton, researchers Deborah Prentice and Dale Miller found students who privately felt uneasy about heavy drinking, yet believed their peers approved far more, and that belief pushed behaviour toward what no one actually wanted. Each person tried to match an imagined norm, and the norm solidified around the imagination. Irving Janis gave another name to the same gravity, groupthink, when the desire for harmony cancels scrutiny and cheerful slogans replace sober analysis. The candle makes a slow crater in its lake of wax, the room stays very still, and the mind asks a practical question with the softness of breath. How can many thoughtful people, each capable of judgment alone, combine into a collective that judges worse than any of them individually? Thomas Schelling offered part of the answer in his work on coordination. People look for focal points to align, bright cues that reduce uncertainty. When cues favour politeness over truth, alignment becomes a theatre of pleasing without seeing. When cues favour speed over doubt, urgency outshouts accuracy. Then comes the cost nobody counted, a plan that satisfies none, a weekend wasted, a year consumed by a strategy that earns applause and empties value. Game theory frames a colder core. In The Prisoner's Dilemma, two rational players, barred from communication, face a choice that rewards betrayal, even though both do better by cooperation. Each fears being the only one to trust, so both defect and both receive less. The paradox of cooperation appears everywhere. Neighbours overuse a shared pasture and ruin it, as Garrett Hardin warned in his Tragedy of the Commons. Yet Elinor Ostrom walked the same fields and found that communities can avoid the tragedy through norms, sanctions and talk, a lattice of rules that are local, accountable and surprisingly humane. What looks inevitable from a distance becomes avoidable at human scale when conversation has structure and belonging has duties. Robert Axelrod staged tournaments where strategies played repeated dilemmas, and the simple program, called Tit for Tat, won often by being clear, nice, retaliatory when harmed, and forgiving after. Cooperation survived not through naive kindness but through transparent rules and a willingness to end feuds. Later, Ernst Fair and Simon Gechter watched people spend money to punish free riders in lab games, an odd expense that keeps commons alive. The candle lowers again, a soft ember inside milk glass, and the mind notices the moral hidden behind the math. Groups do not need heroes to escape bad consensus. They need procedures that make private truth safe to speak before a decision hardens. Anonymous first rounds, silent writing before loud talk, a ritual where each person names one risk and one hope. The pre-mortem that Gary Klein proposed, imagining the plan has failed and asking, what went wrong? Small devices release pressure that might otherwise turn into a trip to Abilene. Often the first dissenting voice functions like the ally in Ash's experiments, shrinking error simply by existing. The trick is making the first voice easy to offer. Respect travels like heat through metal. When one person who holds power opens with uncertainty, permission blooms. The spiral of silence reverses, and a true map begins to assemble. There is an eerie, tender comedy inside every crowd. A stadium stands in ovation sometimes because the first row stands. Then the rows behind rise to avoid looking cold. Then the last rows stand because sitting would feel like protest. And afterward, many think the performance was fine, not great, and the applause was. For belonging, not for excellence. A person coughs, another coughs, then a wave of throats reenacts a weather pattern. Laughter repeats itself after the joke leaves, because laughter remembers how to arrive. Ideas move through bodies the same way. One signal, then another, then a cascade. The paradox of collective mind is that it is both smarter than any individual and dumber than all of them when the first signals lean the wrong way. The cure rarely involves louder argument. It involves gentler architecture. Circles smaller than a crowd where trust can form. Time limits that prevent drift into polite endlessness. Rotating facilitation, so no voice becomes a permanent hill. Meetings where the rule says the leader speaks last. A scoreboard that measures learning, not just deadlines met. The candle sends up a thin ribbon of smoke, then steadies, the air tasting faintly of warm linen and ash, and the night offers one more angle. Collective action problems often pretend to be moral problems, when they are also informational problems. A neighbourhood wants quiet streets, yet each home fears reporting speeding, thinking others do not care. A workplace wants realistic estimates, yet each team rounds up to look strong. A city wants conservation, yet each household doubts that one household matters. Clarity solves part of it. Visible commitments change behaviour. When households post small signs that show their range of savings, neighbours tend to converge upward. When workplaces publish post-mortems that admit error without blame, estimates improve. When cities make social costs visible at the point of choice, taps turn tighter, lights rest more. None of this cancels the need for conscience. It simply reduces the need for heroics. The paradox returns to private life in quiet clothes. Families often make the long drive to Abilene over holidays, agreeing to travel schedules that exhaust everyone, because no one wishes to appear ungrateful. Couples agree to evenings that neither wants, because both want to be agreeable. Friends plan parties too large for the room, because each believes the others expect a spectacle. The correction is small and kind. Ask for real preferences, in quiet, before the calendar locks. Invite dissent as a form of care. Keep options reversible where possible, because reversibility lowers the pride cost of objections. Hold one principle steady above all the others, that a truthful no early is better than a resentful yes later. Philosophers return like old friends at the threshold. Marcus Aurelius wrote to keep the mind ready to see things as they are, and to forgive the mess that appears. That pairing helps here. See the false consensus, forgive the fear that built it, then replace the setting with one that honours truth without scorn. Hannah Arendt warned that truth becomes fragile in public life when opinion and propaganda flood the square, and the only defence she trusted was the stubborn retention of facts by individuals who refused to lie to themselves. The paradox of agreement belongs to that same vigilance. Do not lie to a table about desire, then suffer the consensus that arrives. Tell the small truth early and help others do the same, and the table becomes kinder than politeness ever made it. Outside, night presses its soft palm against the window. Inside, the candle offers one last steady circle. The mind collects the lessons quietly. Admit preferences, even when they complicate a smooth afternoon. Build rooms that welcome first dissent. Choose coordination rules that reward honesty and punish exploitation without frenzy. Conserve heroism for emergencies. Trust simple strategies like tit for tat that balance grace with backbone. Notice when a group begins to travel toward a town no one wants. At the first mile, pull the map back onto the table and let everyone speak without fear. Then stay home or go somewhere lovely together, somewhere the whole circle will remember with that light ache of rightness that arrives when a decision fits the people who must live inside it. The candle keeps its gentle lake and the room grows quiet enough to hear the tiny hiss of melting, and the mind moves toward a paradox of knowing, a strange bend in human judgment where confidence rises as knowledge falls, then sinks again when knowledge deepens, so that the curve looks like a small mountain with fog on top and a valley full of questions below. The philosophers sensed this long ago. Socrates called it wisdom to know that he did not know. Confucius said, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Centuries later, David Dunning and Justin Kruger measured the pattern with patient experiments. Students tested on grammar, logic, and humour often misjudged their rank, and the least skilled overestimated themselves the most. Incompetence hid inside its own blind spot. When training improved skill, calibration improved as well. Knowing better included knowing how little was known. This is the paradox that hums beneath so many errors. The mind does not have a clear window into its own limits, so it paints one and believes the view. Another lab door opens nearby. Frank Keel and Leonid Rosenblit ask people to explain how simple things work. A zipper, a toilet, a helicopter. Confidence bloomed at the start, then wilted mid-explanation. They called it the illusion of explanatory depth. The feeling of knowing is not tied tightly to the content of knowing. It is a sensation, a fluency, a smoothness in the head that can be borrowed from familiarity and speed. Tversky and Kahneman describe the family of shortcuts that live here: availability, representativeness, anchoring. The mind loves quick stories that fit, and the stories feel complete even when they miss the world. Overconfidence grows like moss in that warm wet. Then a colder current crosses it. Thomas Gilovich, Victoria Medvec, and Kenneth Savitsky found that people believe a spotlight shines on them more than it does. The stain on the shirt seems visible to an entire campus. The tremor in the voice seems obvious to a whole audience. Others barely notice. The illusion of transparency sits nearby. The belief that inner states leak through the skin, that fear shows, that guilt shows, that the mind is a window others can read. The paradox is almost comic. The person who knows little often feels sure. The person who knows much often feels exposed. The person who feels painfully seen is barely noticed. The person who believes a story is ready often cannot explain it. Humility and nerve must trade places for life to move. The candle's glow touches the spine of a closed book. The air smells faintly of paper and cooled tea. The mind gathers small stories where the paradox quietly rules outcomes. A new manager arrives with a bright tone and declares that no one should worry, that solutions are simple, that past leaders just lacked clarity. 6 months later, the team has learned a vocabulary of quiet corrections. Hiring is harder than a slogan. Budgets are choices with shadows. People are not code. Confidence has melted into attention. If luck is kind, the manager keeps going and enters the valley where questions multiply and listening becomes craft. Later still, somewhere past the valley, a different confidence returns, older and less theatrical, like a well-used coat that fits without effort. A doctor finishing training knows every guideline and fears every exception. A decade later, the same doctor speaks more softly, orders fewer tests, explains uncertainty with more ease, and catches more rare patterns because ego no longer needs to be the smartest person in the room. The curve vanishes into practice. The paradox shapes private life as well. A mind first discovering a philosophy often speaks like a soldier. Stoicism is the answer. Buddhism is the answer. Nietzsche is the answer. Later, the same mind smiles at the certainty and keeps the discipline without the swagger. Marcus Aurelius returns without fuss, a line remembered over toast, not a banner on a hill. Lao Tzu returns in a glass of water set beside a hard conversation. Frankl returns when a disappointment pulls the floor, and meaning is chosen anyway. The room of the self needs less furniture than it once did. Another layer sits inside prediction. Liechtenstein and Fischoff measured calibration and found that humans are poor at assigning probabilities to future events. Confidence runs ahead of accuracy, yet Philip Tetlock observed a minority of forecasters who improved, who broke big questions into parts, who updated often, who kept score, who compared their certainty to outcomes until the two began to hold hands. The paradox softens here too. Knowing that the mind overtrusts itself becomes a tool that makes the mind trustworthy. Wisdom starts to look less like a crown and more like a checklist, how to live with this curve gently. First, make friends with error. A person can keep a small ledger of guesses and dates, not to punish the self, but to adjust the compass. Predictions about projects, about markets, about moods, about mornings. Check later and ask not who is to blame, but what was missed, what was overweighted, what was invisible then. Calibration grows like a garden if it is watered with specifics. Second, ask for external eyes. An ally can see the blind angle where vanity parks its car. Red teams do this for strategy. Couples do it for plans. The smallest version is the habit of reading writing aloud to catch the music that the inner ear forgave. Third, pull the illusion of transparency up to the light. Speakers who believe their fear is obvious shake more. In studies, those who learned that emotion leaks less than it feels calmed down and performed better. The body believed a kinder fact and followed. Fourth, rehearse explanations. If a belief cannot be explained without waving hands, the belief needs work. Not everything needs a schematic, but anything guiding a real decision deserves more than a glow. Fifth, borrow standards. The scientific method, with its pre-registration and blinding and replication, exists because individual minds are unsteady on their own. Crafts have their own safeguards. Pilots read checklists even when skies are clear. Surgeons pause aloud even when everything is obvious. Writers cut beloved sentences when they serve no purpose. The candle shortens and a bright island floats on the table. The mind visits a darker neighborhood where this paradox is exploited. Demagogues feed the peak of false confidence on purpose. They simplify beyond truth. They reward speed over thought. They flatter where curiosity should be instructed. The cure remains stubborn and small. Teach complexity without despair. Teach simplicity without lies. The world is simple at the right altitude and complex at the wrong one. Learning is the art of climbing until sight matches need. Nietzsche laughed at premature certainty because it kills the appetite that writes better books. Jung warned that shadow unacknowledged runs the house from the basement. Dunning and Kruger handed modern language to an old intuition. Then schools and teams and families must decide whether to turn that language into a cudgel or a mirror. The mirror is better. Laugh at the old peak gently. Live in the valley with curiosity. Climb toward earned quiet confidence without bragging about the hike. The paradox is not an insult. It is a map. A last soft note concerns kindness. The person on the peak is not a villain. That person is simply early. The person in the valley is not weak. That person is simply growing. The person with seasoned confidence is not superior. That person is simply practiced. Rooms that remember this move faster because shame does not jam the door. Apprentices can learn without theatre. Masters can change their minds without losing face. Everyone can say, "I do not know," and keep dignity. Night presses closer to the glass. The candle's edge curls inward. The mind gathers the lesson in one small bowl. Knowledge begins in eagerness, rises into unearned certainty, descends into humility, then climbs into a steadier form that leaves most of the voice behind and keeps the eyes. This shape repeats across fields, across decades, across souls. It teaches patience with beginners, courage in doubt, and restraint when skill finally arrives. It teaches that wisdom is not the absence of confidence. Wisdom is confidence that includes the ocean of not knowing. The lake of wax shines, the wick glows red a moment without flame, then rests. The room is almost dark, and this paradox keeps breathing inside it. Like a quiet tide the mind can hear even after sleep begins. The last ember glows like a small planet in a bowl of glass, and the mind drifts to a paradox that clings to wallets, projects, wars and love. The way holding on to avoid waste creates the greatest waste of all. The way yesterday's cost is used to justify tomorrow's loss. A stubborn tug that feels responsible and often is ruinous. Economists call it the sunk cost fallacy. Psychologists watch its quieter gears turning in the dark. The rule is simple in theory. Costs already paid cannot be recovered, so only future gains and losses should guide choices. The practice is different. A person, a company, a nation looks at what has been poured in, money, time, pride, blood, and says we cannot quit now. The thought sounds like courage. Often it is fear in ceremonial dress. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky mapped the curve beneath it. Loss aversion makes losses bite harder than equal gains please. Prospect theory shows how minds value outcomes relative to a reference point, rather than in absolute terms. Once a path is framed as loss if abandoned, the hand clutches the rope tighter as the cliff edge crumbles. Barry Storr watched escalation of commitment at work. Managers who authorized failing projects doubled down more than those who inherited them. Responsibility married identity, then identity defended the decision as if it were a limb. Storr and Huang later found that NBA teams gave more minutes and more seasons to high draft picks, even when they underperformed, as if the size of the initial bet required more chances to make it right. Hal Arkes and Catherine Bloomer named the psychology of sunk cost, noting that people will sit through a dull play because the ticket was expensive, or drive through a snowstorm to reach a prepaid hotel, as if pain paid later cancels the earlier pain. It does not. The paradox hides inside familiar stories. The Concorde flew for years after it was plain that it would never repay its cost because governments could not admit a glamorous error. Couples stay long past tenderness because the years already spent glow like a temple in memory, and leaving now would make those years feel wasted. Gamblers add another chip to chase what the last chip should have delivered, then lose both. Students spend another year in a program that already numbed them because quitting feels like failure. Companies pour headcount into products that customers do not want because the slide deck once looked so beautiful and everyone applauded. Nations continue wars because lives already lost cannot be for nothing. The words for this are heavy and kind. Nothing can repay the dead, nothing can refund youth, nothing can buy back trust. The paradox asks for a terrible discipline. Honor what was given, then choose by the horizon, not by the whole. The candle sits lower, the room feels cooler, the mind listens to the secondary engines that amplify the fallacy. Cognitive dissonance makes a person uncomfortable when actions and beliefs part ways. Leon Festinger named that heat long ago. To reduce the heat, one can change the belief or change the story about the action. Escalation often becomes a story patch. I was right all along. We only need more time. The IKEA effect described by Michael Norton and colleagues makes us love what we build, even when it is wobbly, because effort confers attachment. The endowment effect, studied by Kahneman, Jack Netsch, and Richard Thaler, makes what we own feel more valuable than what we might acquire, because letting go feels like loss. These currents converge. What is mine? and built by my hands and publicly defended, is hard to abandon even when signals turn red. The paradox grows teeth. The correction is delicate. Cold logic alone rarely works, because the fallacy is not a math error. It is a loyalty error. It is grief disguised as duty. Viktor Frankl wrote that meaning can be chosen even in extremity. Here meaning must be chosen in the form of truth spoken to pride. This path has failed. This money will not return. This love has become harm. This war cannot meet its aim. The voice can remain gentle, but the sentence must be clean. A second correction is environmental. Richard Thaler's nudge work invites designs that make the wise choice feel natural. Pre-commitment helps. Before launching a venture, define exit conditions that are public and specific. If these three indicators are missed on these dates, we pause, we pivot, or we end. Before joining a queue, agree that past waiting time will not influence future decision. If the projected remaining time exceeds an hour, we leave. Before the heart entangles itself beyond repair, agree with a future self that the presence of contempt will be the red line, and that sunk years will not be used to trap the living years to come. A third correction is the presence of honest outsiders. People outside the decision feel less need to justify old costs and can see the horizon plainly. Red teams can test strategy as if they have no children sleeping under its roof. Mentors can ask the embarrassing question without shame. Friends can honor the lost years while pointing toward the open door. The candle's moisture trembles around the wick. The mind gathers a few tender ironies. Sunk cost logic masquerades as gratitude to the past, yet real gratitude looks forward. To thank yesterday, build a better tomorrow. Keep the lesson, release the trap. Marcus Aurelius would nod at this lease of sorrow. He told himself to meet what arrives with a city planner's patience, to ask what the task requires now, not what pride demands now. Lao Tzu would pour water into this jar and watch it find the lowest point without complaint. Ulysses would bind himself to the mast again, but this time the song is different. It sings of past effort and calls it glory, then asks for more. The rope keeps him from steering into rocks made of nostalgia and fear. There is a small comedy in daily life where this paradox steals minutes. A show becomes boring. The mind says, finish the season, because 2 hours are already gone. A book turns flat. The hand keeps moving because 50 pages are in the spine. A meal disappoints. The fork keeps working to extract value from the price. A line crawls. Pride says stay, the empty afternoon says go. In each case, the correction is an instant and a breath. What would I choose now if nothing were already spent? That single question is a clean window. It does not dishonor cost. It simply refuses to drag it across the threshold into the next hour. The room darkens a shade. The ember glows like a patient eye. The mind remembers stories where letting go preserved the one thing worth keeping. A founder retires a beloved product before it poisons the brand, and customers return with trust. A general signs a ceasefire in time to prevent a generation from hardening into hate. A parent releases a plan for a child who is not made for that plan, and the child breathes and begins to grow again. A lover says, thank you for the years and goodbye, and both are freed from a narrowing corridor. There is sorrow in each end. There is a bright responsibility inside the sorrow that says, do not mortgage tomorrow to make yesterday look wise. Nietzsche's amor fati can live here without theatrics. Love fate by meeting it honestly. If the path no longer gives life, love fate by turning the foot. The paradox cannot be solved once and for all. The past will always have a voice. The voice will always know the exact words that stir loyalty. The practice is to listen with a respectful face, then excuse oneself and step outside to read the horizon in fresh air. Seek signs that the world still wants what the plan will make. Seek signals that effort will compound rather than echo. Keep a private ritual of endings that are clean and kind, so that new vows can be made without the stink of stale promises. The ember shortens to a dot. The mind returns to the rule that began this chapter and finds it warmer than it sounded. Costs already paid are gifts to history. They belong to the museum, not to the steering wheel. Take a quiet bow before the exhibits, then go back to the road that still unfolds under living feet, lighter by the weight that has done its work and can be set gently down. The wick breathes a thin blue sigh, and the room seems to listen as the mind walks into a paradox of seeing, the quiet betrayal that happens when numbers rearrange their story the moment groups are mixed, the way an honest pattern flips its face when viewed from a higher balcony, so that truth depends on how the moments are sliced, which feels like cheating until one learns the rules. Statisticians gave this a simple name, Simpson's paradox, though Carl Pearson and Udny Yule met its shadow before, and Edward H. Simpson described it plainly in 1951. The shape is this: in each of several groups, one treatment, one strategy, one choice performs better than another, yet when the groups are combined, the second suddenly wins. The paradox is not a trick. It is a mirror that shows how hidden differences, like stone under shallow water, can tilt the whole stream. A famous case from 1973 at the University of California, Berkeley, seemed at first to reveal bias against women in graduate admissions. The aggregate numbers looked bleak. Women's overall admission rate was lower than men's. Yet when researchers opened the data by department, the supposed bias reversed. Most departments showed no significant discrimination, and some favoured women. The reversal came from a difference in applications. Women had applied more often to highly competitive departments with low acceptance rates for everyone, while men applied more to departments with higher rates. The story did not end in victory or denial. It asked for care. If one looks only at totals, one can accuse an entire house, while missing the stairs that make walking hard for certain shoes. Another classroom example wears a white coat. 2 treatments for kidney stones, call them A and B, show higher success rates within each stone size for treatment. A, small stones and large stones, both better with A. Yet when data are pooled across sizes, B comes out ahead because more large, difficult stones ended up in A. A doctor who treats the patient in front of them should prefer AA within the relevant size group. A hospital manager who looks at totals must understand the case mix before designing policy. The paradox is not an excuse for manipulation. It is a reminder that fairness requires context. Baseball fans have played the same music with averages. A batter can lead another in 2 seasons separately and still lose in the combined average because of differences in at-bats. The mind wants patterns to hold across scales. Nature does not always agree. The candle's halo slides across the table as if searching. The room tastes of warm dust and faint tea. The heart feels a pinch of worry. If statistics can reverse on contact with a larger frame, how should ordinary life trust its stories? The answer is gentle. Learn to ask one more question. What are the groups? Who entered which room? How were the weights assigned? Truth does not disappear, it gains dimension. John Tukey murmurs helpfully from the margin that it is better to have an approximate answer to the right question than a precise answer to the wrong one. The paradox often appears when a lurking variable sits between choice and outcome, shifting the load. In the Berkeley case, it was department selectivity. In the kidney stone example, it was stone size. In workplace data, it might be experience level. In medicine, it might be age. In crime, it might be neighbourhood. When the lurking variable is named and held steady, the reversal resolves back into sense. The candle listens as the mind sets this violin beside another. The bass rate, a quiet drum that keeps the rhythm of how common a thing is before the test begins. The paradox of seeing pairs with the illusion of certainty when base rates are ignored. A test that catches most of what it looks for can still produce more false alarms than true hits if the thing is rare. Kahneman told this story again and again, because professionals forget it too. In courtrooms, the prosecutor's fallacy turns small probabilities into theatre. A match to a rare profile is presented as certain guilt without the base rate of how many people share the trait. Innocence is placed behind glass while arithmetic is dressed for applause. The paradox and the base rate together teach patience. Ask first how the groups were made. Ask second how often the thing appears even before measuring. Then decide with a softer grip. The mind smiles at a strange twist in the middle of the night. The very tools that unmask illusion can become illusions when worshipped without humility. People learn a phrase, Simpson's paradox, and then see it everywhere, like a new constellation. Skeptics learn to suspect every claim of bias and then fail to notice the room where bias really lives. Cynicism feels like wisdom because it is heavy and slow. Wisdom feels lighter than that. It asks for careful cuts and then says perhaps. The flame dims and recovers. The wax makes a little inland sea. The paradox, if taught kindly, becomes a practice that makes life safer. It teaches journalists to show the departmental map, not just the campus total, to show the clinic mix, not just the hospital brag, to show neighbourhoods, not only city pride. It teaches leaders to measure without collapsing distinct stories into one smooth line. It teaches lovers to examine the week by days, not only the month by averages. The month may look kind, while 3 days carry the whole weight of tenderness, and the rest drift toward neglect. The month may look harsh, while a single morning held everything that matters and is worth keeping alive. The mind pulls a stool for philosophy to sit close. Isaiah Berlin spoke of value pluralism, many goods that cannot always be maximized together, trade-offs that are tragic, not because of error, but because the world is made of competing beauties. Simpson's paradox carries a related moral for the age of dashboards. A single summary will abuse a plural world. Competing summaries must be held in both hands. Popper would nod here and ask for hypotheses that can, in principle, fail. If an explanation survives after the confounders are named and tested, it may walk out into daylight. If it must hide behind totals, it should be sent back inside to tidy its room. The paradox also speaks to personal ethics. Aggregation is comfortable because it lets the mind treat people as averages. Context breaks the comforts and returns faces. A policy that looks effective in some may harm a subgroup with quiet consistency, and life asks whether the sum is enough. A friendship that seems stable by the calendar may be failing each Tuesday. A tension that can shift scales without losing kindness is a kind of justice. There is humour in the way the paradox haunts arguments at dinner tables and online squares. Someone posts a chart and declares victory, then someone else slices the data and declares a mirror victory. Both may be right in their slice and wrong in their pride. The candle does not judge. It simply warms the hands of whoever leans close. The path forward looks small and human again. Ask for the table by subgroups before judgment hardens. Let two truths live beside each other when they occupy different rooms. Refuse to let a beautiful total wash a stubborn harm out of sight. Refuse to let a striking subgroup headline drown the honest pattern that holds over all. Hold both, then decide with taste. Taste here is not fashion. It is moral skill, the kind that grows when statistics are kept close to stories. The mind remembers how often a patient wants to know not only the average, but also what happened to people their age, their health, their history. The answer changes when the group changes, and what was frightening in total becomes sober and bearable in context, and sometimes what seemed safe in total becomes dangerous up close. This is not confusion. It is accuracy made humane. A last soft twist, another paradox nested within. The more context is added, the more crowded the truth becomes, and at some point decisions must be made without perfect dissection. The wise person moves then with two promises. First, to act on the best conditional picture available. Second, to keep looking after, acting, in case the picture changes. Camus would place a hand on the shoulder here and say that clarity is a discipline, not a gift. The discipline tonight is simple as a candle. cut the data, name the hidden variables, respect the base rates. Tell the story with enough rooms that no one is pushed into a hallway that hides them. Then go to sleep with the peace that comes from having looked closely without cruelty, and from having let the numbers speak different dialects without forcing them to sing one national anthem that flatters the speaker and forgets the world. The ember steadies like a red star behind thin cloud, and the mind drifts toward a paradox of time, a soft trap that turns plans into mirages and mornings into debt. The way tomorrow is always generous in imagination, while today is tight and hard. The way a future self is treated like a stranger, with a ridiculous strength and patience, a hero who will do the heavy lifting that the present self avoids. Economists call it time inconsistency. Psychologists call it present bias. Philosophers once called it acrosia, weakness of will, the ancient sigh that knows the better and does the worse. George Ainsley traced the curve that makes the trap, hyperbolic discounting, where the sweetness of near rewards falls slowly with distance, then suddenly steepens near the present, so that intentions set on Sunday night shatter on Monday morning because the slope changed underfoot. Thomas Schelling noted that the self is not a single general, but a parliament of competing tempers across time, and each member votes with different priorities. Gunnar Myrdal saw something similar in policy, a nation promising the future one thing and delivering another when the day arrives, the budget trembling as appetite overrides oath. Strotz, long before, described dynamic inconsistency with algebra's quiet bite. Plans that were optimal then are abandoned now, not because information changed, but because the chooser did. In plain rooms, the paradox announces itself with small embarrassments. A person imagines waking early to write, but the bed owns gravity at dawn. A saver vows to invest at month's end, but a flash sale turns the vow into a wish. A project manager swears the build will end in 12 weeks, then encounters Hofstadter's law, grinning in the hallway. It always takes longer than expected, even when Hofstadter's law is taken into account. Bent Fleifbjerg counted megaprojects with a historian's patience and found optimism bias-baked like sugar into concrete. The Sydney Opera House arrived 10 years late, and many times over budget, beauty born of denial and stubborn grace. The Channel Tunnel ran far above cost, a cave through chalk lined with forecasts that learned to smile too easily. Denver's baggage system jammed its gears on the temptation to automate everything at once. Parkinson's law added comedy to the sorrow. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion, and meetings breed minutes the way damp cellars breed a soft, ghostly mildew. The candle's halo leans, the air smells faintly of linen and chalk, and the mind presses a finger on the map where relief has been found before. Odysseus bound himself to the mast because he respected the future song enough to fear it. Schelling called such devices self-command. Economists call them commitment contracts. Behavioural designers call them pre-commitments. The shape is the same. A present self sets fences that keep a future self from bargaining with appetite. Money locked into a retirement account with penalties for early theft. A phone sleeping outside the bedroom in a small wooden box with a lid that sighs when closed. A website blocker with a password held by a friend. A gym appointment made with a partner who will be waiting at dawn, and embarrassment placed in the budget as a very useful tax. Ulysses' contracts succeed where pep talks fail because they change the environment instead of the mood. Viktor Frankl would nod. Meaning governs when circumstance is acknowledged without fantasy. Stoics would nod too. Premeditatio malorum asks the mind to rehearse obstacles in advance, not to suffer twice, but to arrange the room for trouble so that trouble finds fewer chairs. Another candle of help burns in the science of friction. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein pointed out that small barriers move mountains of behaviour. If fruit sits on the first shelf, fruit is eaten. If the forms are longer, the applications die. If saving is the default, saving grows like moss on stone. Removing friction from good habits and inserting friction into temptations is not moral magic. It is plumbing. A third tool lives in time itself. Big promises frighten the nervous system. Tiny starts seduce it. B.F. Skinner would not be offended by the tactic. Habits, once cued and rewarded, can move without rhetoric. The 2-minute rule, a humble cousin of larger ambitions, invites the smallest action at the start: open the document, lace the shoes, water the plant, and Zygarnik's unfinished hum keeps the loop alive until momentum does the rest. The paradox of time also wears a mask called the planning fallacy. Kahneman and Tversky watched teams predict with precision while ignoring the base rate for similar tasks, a sin they admitted in their own careers with rueful humour. Cure it with reference class, forecasting, Flyvbjerg's sober craft. Step outside the romance of this project. Ask how long such things usually take. Add the fat you do not want, and make the number public, so that pride cannot quietly trim it later. A friendlier mask is the hedonism paradox, where pursuing pleasure directly tends to yield less of it than pursuing meaning, connection, and craft. John Stuart Mill discovered this by living hard enough to burn, insisting that happiness comes by the road, not by the chase. The two paradoxes fit like interlocking toys. A person who schedules joy like a quota often finds it tasting of cardboard. A person who schedules attention finds themselves surprised by happiness at the edges. Schedule process tightly, leave outcomes loose. The candle shortens, and the lake of wax holds a trembling star. The Mind Remembers Experiments by Hal Hershfield that show the brain treating the future self like an acquaintance. The medial prefrontal cortex, warm when the present self is considered, cools when the future self is imagined, as if thinking of a stranger. People who saw aged images of themselves in a mirror, rendered by software with gentle cruelty, saved more for retirement afterward. The face made the stranger familiar. The paradox bloomed and then softened with a photograph. Maybe every desk needs a small wrinkled portrait of the future owner of this hour, a quiet ethical demand sitting in a frame. There is humour in the small hacks that keep time's trickster honest. Coins in a glass jar for every snooze button press, donated to a cause one does not love. A co-working table reserved with a deposit that hurts enough to get one out the door. A rule that caffeine cannot begin until the first 20 lines are written. A bedtime alarm that rings for 1 minute at the same hour each night and speaks a single sentence: protect tomorrow's animal. The paradox is serious, but its defeat is playful, because play shrinks resistance while sermons feed it. A darker alley remains. Some deadlines grow fangs because fear of failure dresses itself as perfection. Hofstadter's law expands to infinity inside an artist who keeps polishing the same hinge. Here the time paradox meets the control paradox from earlier nights. The correction is clear and unpleasant. Ship smaller, ship earlier. Invite judgment. Let reality strike the clay so the next shaping can be honest. Nietzsche would mutter about becoming who one is by deeds, not by drafts. Musashi would place the brush beside the blade and practice strokes as he practiced cuts, with discipline under quiet air. Endings help too. When a day ends on purpose, not by accident, trust accumulates, and tomorrow does not begin beneath a fallen shelf of debris. Choose a time past which decisions are punished for appearing. Choose a time where screens darken like wells. Choose a ritual that turns ambition into sleep, the only bank that lends energy at interest. The ember nods as if in agreement. The night lingers as if listening. The paradox of time will not retire. The present will always plead its case with a stronger voice. Yet the parliament of selves can be governed by rules that respect biology and bend psychology. Bind the mast where needed. Remove the sweets from the table. Put the shoes by the bed. Budget shame as a clumsy ally until pride learns to walk without it. Forecast with reference classes, not with hope alone. Put the face of the future on the desk and bow to it. End the day before it ends you. Then let the small river of hours steady itself inside those banks, not tamed, not conquered, simply guided like water that knows how to find the sea if given a channel and a sky. The ember rests like a patient eye, and the room listens as the mind steps into a paradox of silence. The way trying to shut a thing up teaches it to shout. The way a hand pressed on water makes it leap higher at the edges. The way a forbidden door glows brighter in a hallway that was dull a moment before. Psychologists named one engine behind this heat psychological reactance. In the 1960s, Jack Brame described how people resist limits not only with reason, but with appetite. Ban a toy and a child circles it like a moon. Lock a cabinet and the cabinet becomes a song. A later study with preschoolers showed the effect with gentle clarity. A barrier placed between children and two identical toys made the blocked one more desired. Resistance creates romance. Romeo and Juliet learned an older version of the same math. When parents disapproved, attraction grew teeth. Social scientists even borrowed the lovers' names to describe the way obstacles turn infatuation into a rebellion with poetry. In public life, the paradox has a modern nickname, the Streisand effect, after an attempt in 2003 to suppress an aerial photograph of a private home that few had noticed until lawyers tried to erase it. The erasure became a signal flare. Curiosity, like wind, found the flame and fed it. Attempts to censor often supply the headline that promotion could not buy. People resent being steered. They suspect hidden motives behind heavy curtains. The mind, proud and shy, feels freer when choosing, and that feeling of freedom is itself part of truth. When it is threatened, attention hardens into defiance. The candle trembles, then steadies. The air smells of linen and dust. The mind remembers the control paradox from earlier nights and sees their kinship. Forcing rest keeps eyes open. Forcing silence breeds rumour. Forcing virtue manufactures theatre. The way out is rarely more force. It is better design. Consider parenting again, because homes are laboratories that run all the time. A teenager hears "do not see that person," and the sentence pours gasoline on an ember. The wiser approach, difficult and slow, is a conversation that offers choices inside a firm boundary. Safety non-negotiable, curfew clear, values named with love, then room to choose the path. Reactance cools when agency survives inside the rule. In workplaces, the same physics governs trust. Block every website and adults find proxies that are worse. Instead, create a narrow list of harms, be explicit about what the rule protects, and give teams responsibility for their own guardrails. When a policy can be explained without embarrassment and revised without humiliation, it ages well. When a policy is erected like a statue to fear, employees learn to bow in public and mock in kitchens. The paradox of silence grows louder in digital squares. Platforms stamp a warning on a post and eyes multiply. Remove a post without context and versions proliferate in screenshots and whispers, now carrying the glamour of the forbidden. The human nervous system is a gossip engine tuned for threat. Research on virality shows that moralized anger and surprise travel fast because those emotions recruit attention and group defense. The wiser art in moderation uses friction more than spectacle. Downrank without trumpet. Provide context above the fold. Insert counter-speech from peers rather than proclamations from distant towers. Replace without rehearsing the myth, the lesson from illusory truth. Because repetition, even with a scowl, can launder falsehood into familiarity. The paradox grows more complicated here because a different rule insists on limits. Karl Popper wrote about the paradox of tolerance, that unlimited tolerance can end in the death of tolerance when intolerance uses the openness of the square to destroy the square. A community cannot survive by flattering the appetite of those who would erase it. The mind holds both truths, like bowls of water. Suppression can amplify. Boundaries can preserve. The tension is not solved by slogans, it is managed by craft and humility. Censors of old often advertised the books they feared. The Index, meant to guard souls, made titles famous across borders. Samizdat, born in fear, taught citizens to read like detectives and to worship the smuggled page. Prohibition in the United States launched a ladder of unintended consequences that built organized crime as if it were a public works project. Yet the absence of any guardrails at all invites harm that multiplies faster than private remedies can heal. The wiser sentence is small. Target behavior, not identity. Target incitement and coordination, not mere offense. Make enforcement visible enough to reassure the vulnerable and invisible enough to starve the arsonist of spectacle. Keep appeal paths clean. Admit error openly so that rules do not pretend to be gods. The candle lowers and the lake of wax mirrors the ceiling. The room seems to breathe with the quiet. The paradox also lives inside the private mind in softer clothing. Try not to think of a white bear, Wegener taught, and the white bear walks right in. Suppress the thought and it brightens. The cure again begins with permission. Name the bear. Sit it in a chair by the window. Return to the task with a light touch. The thought will pass like a polite stranger when it is not arrested. Tell the mind, do not be anxious, and anxiety listens as a dare. Tell the body, breathe small and slow, and the body begins to follow. Tell the day, do not fail, and failure arrives to check the locks. Tell the hands, begin, only begin, and they are more likely to keep going. The paradox of silence speaks in relationships too. Couples who police words too tightly learn to hide the real ones. Families that punish disagreement manufacture distance that lasts for years. Offices that stage safety with slogans but punish candor in practice end up leaking truth in private chats and cynical jokes, a kind of corrosive air that shortens the life of every room. The cure is not anarchy of speech, it is clean expectation and transparent consequence, paired with a ceremony that protects dissent from shame. One person can begin this with a phrase, "Say the thing you are scared will make me love you less," and watch with care that love survives the sentence. In cities and states, the paradox carries budget lines. Bans on books move copies, bans on ideas make classrooms electric with alternate sources. Bans on narratives trap citizens in underground literature that grows barbs. Better to teach source quality, to show logic gently, to encourage debates where the losing side is thanked for sharpening the winning one. As Mill argued, truth needs the friction of error to keep its muscles, and communities that understand this write fewer laws and more syllabi. There is irony here that tastes like dark honey. People say they want safety, yet they also want edges that prove they are free. People say they want silence, yet they lean toward any noise that says rebel. The mind is a house with many windows. If the front is nailed shut, the back invites thieves. The candle flickers once at the memory of history's warnings. Propaganda thrives where citizens are treated as children. Rumour thrives where citizens are treated as prisoners. Trust thrives where citizens are treated as adults with duties, protected by laws that are narrow, intelligible, and revisable. The paradox of silence then becomes manageable. Not a trick to win, a climate to cultivate. Practical moves feel humble but carry power. Replace bans that shout with frictions that cool. Offer reasons before rules and choices within them. Build norms with the people who must live under them. Publish enforcement patterns so rumour cannot invent monsters. Train responders to recognise that swagger feeds fire and humility often starves it. Aim to protect the room rather than to punish the villain. And privately, accept that some flames spread when swatted, so the wiser hand sometimes draws the curtain and lets oxygen starve the spark. The ember is small now. The wax holds it like a cupped palm. The mind gathers the paradox in one breath. What is forbidden can be made famous by the forbidding. What is permitted without care can eat the house. Wisdom lives between, letting words breathe while holding back the kind that strip breath from others. In that balanced weather, curiosity heals its own burns. The room sleeps, the street quiets. Somewhere, someone tries to hide an ordinary picture and teaches a nation to look. Somewhere else, someone turns a policy into a conversation and watches anger soften because respect arrived first. The lesson folds itself like cloth and waits on the chair. Do not push the water, shape the banks. Let the river learn that it can travel far without drowning the field. The ember leans like a tiny moon over a silver lake of wax, and the mind drifts to a paradox that hums inside every room where people try to look strong. A quiet reversal where the attempt to seem flawless pushes connection away, and a small admission of flaw pulls it close. The way a hairline crack in a cup makes the tea taste honest. The way a gentle mistake can turn competence from cold marble into living hand. Psychologists gave one doorway into this mystery a playful name, the pratfall effect. In 1966, Elliot Aronson and his colleagues staged a quiz game. A highly competent contestant, bright and poised, spilled coffee on himself at the end. Listeners liked him more after the spill. The same spill on a mediocre contestant lowered his appeal. The lesson was not to fabricate clumsiness, but to notice how a minor blunder humanizes a competent person, exchanging distance for warmth. The paradox is strange and daily. Perfection repels. Near perfection, with a smudge, invites. Another window opens with the beautiful mess effect observed in recent work by Oval Caesar, Francesca Gino, and Michael Norton. People judge their own acts of vulnerability, confessing uncertainty, asking for help, apologizing, as less attractive than identical acts performed by others. On the inside, vulnerability felt like exposure, almost a stain. From the outside, the same act looked like courage and sincerity. A cousin walks beside it, the liking gap. After conversations, strangers tend to underestimate how much the other liked them, a habit measured by Erica Boothby and colleagues. Shyness is fed by this misreading. People hold back more than they should, then assume the quiet means disinterest, and a soft loneliness grows under perfectly polite talk. The candle's small flame barely breathes and the room feels like a throat that wants to sing. The paradox asks a tender question. If vulnerability often increases trust and liking, why is it so hard to choose? The answer is partly in the mirror made by shame. Each person sees their own interior with cruel magnification. The spotlight effect already visited earlier. The illusion that everyone can hear the tremor one hears. There is also a strategic fear. The mind knows that some people exploit weakness, so it learns a general rule and over-applies it. Irving Goffman's theatre of everyday life adds a further layer. Social roles require performance. Masks are not always lies. They are tools that let groups function. Yet a sealed mask suffocates. Jung warned that the shadow, unacknowledged, takes the wheel from the basement. Nietzsche wrote with a smile that masks tell the truth in sideways ways. Wear one too long, and the face hardens to fit it. The paradox then becomes practical. Where, when, and how much vulnerability nourishes trust without feeding the wolves? The answer is small and concrete. In professions where lives and stakes are heavy, clean admissions of uncertainty enlarge credibility. Patients trust a clinician who says, "I do not know yet, here is the plan to find out," more than one who fakes certainty and pivots later. In cockpits and operating rooms, checklists enforce humble talk. A pilot reads aloud a doubt. A surgeon invites a nurse to challenge a step. Hierarchy loosens its jaw and safety improves. This is vulnerability as a system, not as a performance, and it works because it protects the mission, not the ego. In leadership, the paradox appears as a soft law. A leader who never shows limits becomes unbelievable and unteachable. A leader who confesses carefully, then acts decisively, becomes a magnet for candor. Teams imitate what is rewarded. If confession is punished, problems are hidden until they explode. If confession is welcomed and paired with responsibility, problems surface early and shrink. In friendship and love, the paradox turns intimate. A person hiding pain to stay attractive invites distance. A person naming pain without drowning the room invites touch. The difference between vulnerability and self-handicapping matters here. Self-handicapping, described by Berglas and Jones, is the art of planting excuses before performance, a preemptive story to protect esteem if failure arrives. Vulnerability is not that. Vulnerability is risking esteem by telling the truth about limits and hopes and mistakes, then showing up to do the work anyway. It offers the other a bridge rather than a shield. The candle's light traces the rim of a glass. The air smells like warm paper and sleep. The paradox is exploited too in the theatre of manipulation. Some will stage helplessness to outsource effort, a brittle mimicry of openness that drains rooms. The defense against counterfeit vulnerability is boundary and memory. Patterns tell the difference over time. True openness makes repair easier, takes responsibility after error, and grows capacity. Counterfeit openness avoids responsibility, multiplies emergencies, and stays the same. The mind pours in examples with the calm of rain. The best apologies do not defend. They name the harm, accept responsibility, offer repair, and ask nothing in return. Research on apology structure shows that specific, responsibility-rich apologies heal more than vague, self-protective ones. The paradox lives at the center. The more one tries to protect image inside the apology, the less effective it becomes. Sincere loss of face earns back more face than a careful, non-apology under glass. The Ben Franklin effect waits in the wings too. Ask a small favor and the helper grows to like the asker more, rationalizing their help as care. Vulnerability that invites participation strengthens bonds, because helping is a bridge that both can cross. Yet if the favor is always the same and only flows one way, the bridge cracks from uneven weight. In the marketplace, brands that admit faults and fix them publicly invite loyalty that glossy perfection never earns. When a company says, "We broke this and here is precisely how we will make you whole," customers become storytellers. When a company hides until caught, then releases a lawyered paragraph, customers become archivists of grudges. The paradox also sings in art. Wabi-sabi praises the crack. Kintsugi repairs it with gold. A bowl becomes more beloved after breakage because the repair tells a history. Performers who confess nerves before a first note often play freer. Writers who admit what they cannot do sometimes write the sentence that frees them to do it. A small glitch becomes a door. The door opens a room. In politics and public speech, a difficult craft emerges. Vulnerability cannot be faked well. When it is faked, citizens smell it and harden. When it is real, it must not become the whole show, because governance demands a spine. The paradox holds both ends. Strength needs truth to stay trusted. Truth needs strength to stay useful. The candle sinks a little, and the wax trembles like a shallow sea. The mind offers a compact practice. Replace the performance of flawlessness with one clean sentence of reality at the start of hard things. I miss this. I need help with that. I do not know yet. Then follow with the next action, specific and within reach. Do not spill coffee on purpose. Do not bleed for display. Simply let the room see the human hand on the lever. In private, schedule small confession with oneself. 5 minutes to write the thing that is being hidden. Then one choice that reduces the hiding. Shame is strongest when unspoken. Once named, it becomes a task. Ask 3 people at different distances in life what makes them trust. The answers rhyme across decades and continents. Tell me what you do not know. Tell me what you will do next. Tell me the truth when it is awkward. Hold me to my best without contempt. Accept my flaw without worshipping it. Paradox becomes path. The night leans its ear against the window. The ember dims to a dot. The lesson curls up beside the others, like a cat at the edge of a warm bed. Connection grows when perfection is released. Authority grows when it does not pretend to be God. Attraction grows when competence is human. When laughter is allowed, when the hand shakes a little, and the voice says, "Here is where it shakes," and the work goes on anyway. The quietest strength is the kind that can survive being seen. The wick settles into a quiet blue, and the room holds its breath while the mind slips toward a paradox of improvement, a gentle trap that unfolds whenever making a system safer or more efficient invites behavior that cancels the gain. The way a deeper well draws more thirsty feet. The way a wider road teaches cars to multiply. The way a lighter lamp leaves lights burning longer until night looks like day and the energy bill rises in a house that swore it would fall. William Stanley Jevons wrote about this in 1865, while coal dust hung in the air over England. In the coal question, he noticed that better steam engines, more efficient at turning coal into motion, did not lower coal consumption. They made coal more useful, so factories multiplied and total coal burned climbed. Efficiency produced economy, and economy produced appetite. The paradox has returned in every era with new clothes. LED bulbs make each lumen cheap, then cities leave lights on all night, and parks glow like stadiums. Insulated homes drop heating costs, then families warm more rooms to a softer luxury. Cheap flights democratize the sky, then weekend trips multiply, and the carbon ledger grows. Jevons did not argue against efficiency. He warned that efficiency without price or norm signals can summon demand that outruns the saving. The candle's light rests on a small bowl. The room smells faintly of cotton and cooled tea. Another cousin of this paradox sits in the realm of safety. Sam Peltzman watched how regulation in the 1960s made cars safer, seat belts and stronger frames and improved brakes, then found that drivers adapted, some pressing deeper on the accelerator, some following more closely. The Peltzman effect was controversial, yet later studies across domains found versions of risk compensation. Anti-lock brakes prevented many skids, yet in some places collision rates did not fall as expected because drivers treated the new grip as permission to squeeze margins. Helmets protect heads in sports, yet a subset of players then used the helmet as a weapon. After ski bindings grew more secure, a fraction of skiers trusted the edges as if the mountain were tame. The lesson is not to remove safety, it is to anticipate the human tendency to spend the safety dividend on speed. Gerald Wild called it risk homeostasis, the strange thermostat that nudges behaviour back toward a preferred level of danger. The city builds a wider road to ease traffic, and the paradox arrives on schedule. More lanes lower the cost of an extra trip, so more trips are taken, and the relief evaporates. Economists call it induced demand. Anthony Downs watched its rhythm, and Tom Vanderbilt described it in the patient prose of traffic. The problem grows sly when one more road harms the whole network. In 1968, Dietrich Bress described a puzzle where adding a high-speed link made travel times worse for everyone. Drivers, each seeking a personal best route, rearranged their paths to clog the new shortcut. Wardrop's principle of user equilibrium hummed in the background, each driver choosing a route that no one could improve alone. The network became slower because selfish optimizers created a collective jam. The flame leans and steadies. The wax makes a small lake that remembers heat. The mind sees how kindness and cunning can both slip from the same well. Efficiency is a gift, safety is a gift, but gifts in open systems behave like seeds in weather. They sprout according to soil and wind, incentives and habits, not according to intention alone. The paradox asks for design that includes behaviour. A lamp that is cheap to run should be paired with norms about darkness that let birds migrate and people sleep. A helmet that saves a brain should be paired with rules that forbid using the helmet as a battering ram. A wide road should be paired with a price signal that keeps crowding honest. London's congestion charge and Singapore's electronic road pricing are examples not of punishment, but of alignment. Make the private cost match the public cost, and the network remembers how to breathe. Cities that removed small segments of roadway found relief where theory predicted more pain. Seoul tore down the Cheonggyecheon overpass and restored a river. Traffic redistributed. A park appeared, air cleared like a fever breaking. New York pedestrianized parts of Times Square, and the city did not choke. Bicycles and feet, once treated as decoration, became practical arteries. The paradox softened under craft. Energy designers have their own cures for Javan's old ghost. Decoupling becomes a quiet aim, using prices, standards, and culture to keep total consumption from rising even as efficiency greets each appliance. Carbon prices, tiered electricity rates, and smart thermostats that reward restraint help translate good intentions into durable patterns. Without such companions, rebound eats the saving. A house that installs efficient air conditioning can be encouraged to set a higher thermostat through time-of-use pricing that nudges cooling toward cooler hours. A factory that replaces motors can be offered a contract that rewards absolute reductions, not just intensity per unit. The candle's glow touches the curve of a glass, and the scent in the room deepens like warm paper. The paradox carries a moral courtesy. Blame is the wrong instrument. Human adaptation is not villainy. It is intelligence that must be partnered. Systems should expect it and guide it. In medicine, this becomes careful messaging when preventive measures arrive. A new antiviral does not license carelessness if hospital beds are finite. A vaccine does not cancel the duty to protect neighbours who cannot be vaccinated. Risk homeostasis need not be a destiny if norms lift the target for acceptable risk. Culture can set a new thermostat. Scandinavia lowered traffic deaths not only through safer cars, but through street design that refuses to flatter speed. Narrow lanes, raised crossings, protected bike paths, and strict liability for drivers near vulnerable users communicate a non-verbal ethic. The paradox retreats because the whole stage says slow is normal. In finance, safety devices like derivatives and insurance can reduce individual exposure while increasing systemic risk if they encourage leverage. Taleb's writing on fragility invites a response that does not merely build thicker walls, but changes the game, smaller units, fire breaks, skin in the game for decision makers, so that the thrill of borrowed safety does not turn into a black tide when the wind shifts. The mind collects small daily versions. A person who buys a waterproof phone may wander into rainstorms without thought and still ruin the device with a river they never would have entered before. A cyclist who installs bright lights may assume drivers can see everything, then forget that glare can blind. A password manager makes strong passwords effortless. Then the master password is chosen poorly because the sense of safety says relax. The answer is not suspicion of tools. It is companionship with tools. Pair every safety with a behavior rule. Pair every efficiency with a boundary. The candle lowers, and the lake of wax shines like a quiet eye. The paradox can be used for gentler ends as well. Sometimes making a good choice slightly more effortful protects it from thoughtless overuse. Meditation apps that limit endless streak chasing can preserve the practice from becoming a scoreboard. Streaming services that dim autoplay let the mind remember to sleep. Social feeds that slow posting when language turns heated can protect friends from the peltsman of the tongue. Policies that see rebound as a river, not a villain, will shape banks, not scald water. Designers whisper a few practical rules. Price the scarce thing. Protect the soft thing. Expect the clever monkey. Test in the wild. Measure total outcomes, not just per unit brilliance. Avoid gifts that require saints to use them correctly. Reward the choice that keeps the commons alive. Keep a small tax on speed where speed tries to make a home that was never meant for it. The room quiets until even the tiny hiss of the wick becomes a lecture in miniature. Philosophy nods at economics, and psychology offers a patient hand. Lao Tzu's water flows through the chapter, persistent, gentle, carving stone. Marcus Aurelius looks at a grindstone and reminds that the tool is nothing without the arm that guides it. Jevons clears his throat and asks that light be loved with restraint. Peltzman raises an eyebrow and asks that safety be offered with a plan for appetite. Brace points at a map and reminds that selfish cleverness can slow everyone together. The mind gathers the threads and ties them with a small knot. Progress is a garden, not an escalator. Every improvement invites visitors. Invite the right ones and charge admission when the paths would otherwise drown in feet. Then let the night hold its darkness, where darkness is medicine, and let the morning light the rooms that deserve it, and let roads carry what they can without being asked to swallow the world. The wick makes a faint thread of blue, and the room settles as the mind steps into a paradox of goodness, a soft inversion where virtue done once can license looseness later, where a small righteous act becomes a ticket to indulgence, where the feeling of being good today quietly buys permission for tomorrow's corner cutting, and the ledger of the soul learns to do funny math in candlelight. Philosophers warned in older language. Aristotle called virtue a habit, not a trophy, a practiced hexis that lives in repeated acts more than in single victories. Kant distrusted bookkeeping piety, since duty to be duty cannot be traded for sweets. Yet the psyche bargains. Benoit Monod and Dale Miller showed that earning moral credentials can free later bias. After signalling egalitarian views, participants felt licensed to choose less egalitarian options without seeing themselves as prejudiced. Yoel Inbar and colleagues found similar permission slips where prior good deeds softened the sting of later selfishness. Nina Mazar and Chen Bo-jong watched shoppers primed by green products cheat more on a subsequent task, as if buying virtue allowed theft of pennies from a jar. Uzma Khan and Ravidar observed dieters granting themselves rich desserts after choosing a healthy entree, the health halo becoming a shadow on the plate. Hal Arkes named the single-action bias in environmental choices, where one token step satisfies a hungry conscience and real reduction stall. Investigators of slacktivism, like Catherine White, Andreas Eisingerich, and William B. Christopherson, traced how public badge displays can quench the thirst to help by satisfying impression goals. When the first act signals goodness to others, later costly help declines, while private commitments that strengthen identity can increase follow-through. The paradox of goodness hides in ordinary rooms. A person donates once, then snaps at the server because generosity has already been proven. A manager grants one flexible arrangement and then ignores smaller daily kindness because the big story was written. A company announces a glossy sustainability report and feels freer to compromise in the quiet corners of supply chains. A city plants trees for a photo, then approves the easy parking lot. The candle leans, the air smells of paper and warm dust. The mind recognizes the accounting trick. Identity wants coherence, then finds shortcuts to buy it on credit. Moral self-licensing is not simple hypocrisy. Often it is an honest confusion about what makes a life good, a confusion amplified by fatigue, stress, and the social currencies of praise. Moral cleansing sits nearby, its mirror, where a small wrong deed drives exaggerated displays of goodness to restore the self-image. Both move numbers without moving substance. The paradox grows teeth in domains where lives bend around it. After public safety campaigns, some drivers speed a little because their car's new guardian angels blink reassuringly. After a public apology, a leader's halo returns and scrutiny relaxes, though structures remain unchanged. After a corporate diversity initiative, hiring managers unconsciously award themselves credit and then drift back to comfort. The evidence on each case varies, yet the family resemblance returns in study after study. A single signal, then a purchase of permission. Aristotle's old insistence on repetition looks less quaint and more surgical. Virtue as habit disarms the ledger. The candle lowers. The mind gathers tools that make the paradox smaller. First, designed for identity rather than for badges. When a behaviour answers the sentence, "I am the kind of person who," licensing fades because the act is not a receipt, but a reflection. Dan McAdams's research on narrative identity reminds that people live inside stories. If the story says helper, steward, truth-teller, the acts that follow protect the arc more than they purchase release from it. Second, make the first act private when possible, if the goal is later substance. Christopherson's work showed that private initial support can internalize identity and increase costly help, while public tokenism often satisfies display. Third, remove the ledger from places where it corrupts. Couples know this. Counting kindness poisons it. A practice of daily small care removes the temptation to trade 3 good deeds for 1 sharp remark. Fourth, use moral reminders that are not scolds. Signing an honesty pledge at the top of a form reduced cheating and experiments by Lisa Shu and colleagues, because the mind remembers itself when the pen is still new. Honor codes, when alive rather than decorative, do similar quiet work. Fifth, plan with implementation intentions so that goodness does not depend on mood. Peter Gollwitz's simple if-then. Plans remove the bargaining table. If the inbox presents a crisis, then the evening walk remains. If the store markets virtue with green packaging, then the label is read slowly. If the headline praises the brand, then the audit follows anyway. Sixth, separate accounts ethically. Thaler wrote about mental accounting as a psychological fact. The cure here is to delete the moral budget line that trades lives between columns. No purchase cancels honesty. No donation cancels contempt. No stance cancels listening. Seventh, measure outcomes as well as identity. The mind loves to feel good. The world needs good done. A city that rewards tons of CO2 reduced instead of press releases finds licensing less delicious. A workplace that publishes transparent pay bands and promotion data makes it harder to buy absolution with one glossy mentorship event. Eighth, pair pride with humility. Pride says keep going. Humility says do not spike the ball at midfield. The paradox of goodness loses tension when both speak in the same breath. The flame shrinks to a patient bead. The room feels like a chapel without sermon. Aristotle returns, smiling tiredly, pointing toward repetition. Kant returns, stern and careful, refusing conversion of persons into currency. Nietzsche sneaks a wry note, mocking moral vanity that dances for applause. Frankl stands in the doorway, gentle and unblinking, reminding that meaning is not a costume for evenings, but a practice inside suffering and choice. Daily life offers small laboratories to test the craft. A person carries a reusable bag and then notices the purchases inside it. A board funds a program and then schedules the follow-up meeting where outcomes, not intentions, will be read aloud. A friend posts a cause and then texts the organizer to ask for the unglamorous task no one wants. A city places a bike lane and then protects it with steel, not paint. So the virtue cannot be stolen by a fast-turning truck. In each case, the light moves from self to world and the ledger grows quiet. There is humour that dampens self-importance without cruelty. A jar on the counter labelled brag tax, a coin dropped in whenever a virtue is announced. The coins fund someone else's need. A calendar square named Audit the Halo, a reminder to check whether last week's good news became this week's excuse. A phrase shared among friends with affection, "Don't spend the sainthood," as a smile at the door before a hard conversation. The paradox will not vanish. The psyche likes bargains. The culture sells them in tasteful fonts, but the candle offers a simpler arithmetic. Goodness that is real does not need to be spent to justify anything. It needs to be repeated until it becomes boring and then repeated still. That is how habits are born and how lives grow honest. The wick glows and thins. The lake of wax reflects a dim ceiling. A last soft sentence gathers itself like a small flame cupped in both hands. Let one good act be a beginning, not a receipt. Let the next act ignore the ledger and look at the world. Let identity be earned by doing quietly until the paradox grows tired of knocking and wanders off to find an easier house. The wick is a red pin against a small lake of wax, and the room grows so quiet a page might turn by itself, and the mind walks into the last knot for tonight. A soft paradox that gathers all the others, like threads in a patient hand. The way meaning arrives when it is not hunted. The way peace visits when invited rather than pursued. The way freedom increases when a vow is made. The way identity loosens when the story is told truthfully and then holds firmer because the telling is clean. Philosophers from different mountains carried lanterns toward the same door. Epictetus drew a circle around what is ours and what is not, then asked for disciplined action inside the first and graceful consent outside it. Lao Tzu watched water and trusted its quiet power, not weak, not loud, capable of carving stone by refusing to imitate stone. Carl Rogers gave the paradox a living sentence, that when a person accepts themselves as they are, only then can they change. Camus imagined Sisyphus and chose defiance that feels like tenderness, a man who finds meaning not in winning against gravity, but in meeting gravity without lying. Nietzsche tested the heart with the eternal return, asking whether a life would still be chosen if it had to be lived again and again without remainder, a heavy question that clears the smoke from a room because it invites each small act to qualify as worthy of forever. Viktor Frankl walked through terror and found that purpose can be chosen even when everything else is taken, a paradox sharper than words, because choosing where to aim one's inner eye becomes the last form of freedom and the first form of strength. Tonight the paradox wears simpler clothes. The more a person tries to feel alive, the thinner life becomes. The more a person tries to be admired, the lonelier admiration feels. The more a person tries to be safe, the more fragile safety becomes. Yet when attention is given to the work to be done, admiration sometimes arrives as a side effect and does not matter much. When courage is chosen in one small place, safety grows in surprising corners without fanfare. When aliveness is not demanded but practiced as presence, the palate remembers how bread tastes. There is a practical kindness inside all this. A life can be steered by questions that are almost childlike. What is mine to do here? What is the smallest step that honours it? What truth can be said without cruelty? What boundary protects what I love without making me hard? The candle nods and holds steady. The room smells like warm paper and cooling tea. The mind gathers the paradox of control from earlier nights and sets it beside the paradox of time and the paradox of measurement and sees the same shape under different weather. Grip less, guide more. Promise less, prepare more. Count less, notice more. When a person stops trying to command sleep, sleep comes. When a culture stops worshipping the scoreboard, craft recovers. When a team stops pretending speed is wisdom, they choose pacing that finishes. The air is still. The flame leans without going out. A strange mercy of paradox is that it releases the pride of fixing everything alone. Many knots untie when a second set of hands arrives. Research on social support is unromantic and beautiful. People survive longer, heal faster, stay sober longer, and learn better when one stable friend or partner or mentor stands near. The paradox of vulnerability, that competence warms when it admits a crack, is how those hands arrive. A single sentence said plainly opens the door for a second sentence from the other side, and then meaning is co-authored, which is truer to how meaning has always grown. There is a neighbour to these thoughts called anti-fragility, the observation that some systems do not simply withstand stress but are strengthened by it if the stress is sized well. Muscles, bones, immunities, skills, trust all ask for dose and recovery. The paradox reveals a rule of kindness. Protect the child, not with glass but with practice. Protect the city, not with slogans but with design that expects weather. Protect the mind, not with denial, but with rituals that meet difficulty in small training grounds, so that larger storms find a house that knows where its candles are. There is also a paradox of power that the old masters understood without jargon. The more a person leans on force, the weaker their influence becomes when the force is absent. The more a person earns trust, the less force they need. Joseph Nye later called it soft power, but the idea is older than names. A parent who listens needs fewer rules. A teacher who respects needs fewer punishments. A leader who keeps promises needs fewer speeches. Power made of attention multiplies by being given away. The candle's edge folds like a chapel, and the lake of wax brightens, and the mind turns to the paradox of rest. Work improves when rest is honoured. Creativity blooms after idleness. Memory consolidates when the lights are out. Nietzsche walked at dusk. Beethoven walked at dawn. Georgia O'Keeffe wandered desert silence and painted flower interiors that looked like galaxies. When the nervous system is granted unstructured quiet, it builds structure on its own. The last paradox tonight is the gentlest. The more one tries to craft a perfect ending, the more the ending stiffens and loses air. Endings prefer modesty. Rituals work because they are repeated without drama. Seneca reminded that the day should be examined like a friend, praised where it helped, forgiven where it failed, and then placed on its shelf. A small closing routine is the opposite of a grand finale. It is a candle put out with fingertips made wet, a desk cleared of one paper, a sentence written on a card for mourning, a glass of water set where a future hand will thank a present kindness. A last set of images gathers itself like sheep at night. A person stands at a sink and rinses a cup, and the day rinses with it. A phone sleeps outside the room. A window is open 2 fingers. The air changes. The body remembers it is an animal. A short line is spoken aloud, not as magic, not as command, simply as orientation. Do what is mine, accept what is not, love anyway. The paradoxes from tonight do not vanish in that air. They stack into a quiet architecture one can live inside. Control becomes craft, choice becomes commitment, measurement becomes noticing, then action. Conformity becomes courage made of small first sentences. Sunk cost becomes gratitude without chains. Time inconsistency becomes guardrails built by a friend with one's own name. Simpson's reversal becomes a habit of asking how the rooms were arranged. Jevon's rebound becomes design that respects appetite and guides it. Vulnerability becomes a bridge. Moral licensing becomes a bell that rings when the ledger appears, so that the ledger can be laughed at and closed. The mind, softened by sleep's gravity, lets these rooms line up like constellations, not cages, and the night grows larger. Somewhere far away, a train sounds like a long cello note. Somewhere closer, a clock decides it is tired of performing and keeps time in secret. The candle draws down to a coal that refuses to hurry. The last sentence is not clever. It is not even a sentence, more like a breath taught to itself. Enough for today. Enough to begin again. Enough to trust that not pushing is sometimes the strongest push of all. Enough to sleep. Enough to wake. Enough